Thank you, Chairman. I'll be very brief. Chairman, you mentioned earlier on that the Federal Reserve could have done things. They had the power and authority. They didn't act. Specifically, where it relates to over-leverage, what could they have done?
Well, first of all, I was commenting specifically on their failure to adopt mortgage lending standards, which they have the full authority to do, that would apply to all institutions. And in that regard, they failed miserably. In 2001, they adopted some regulations. Our regulatory bodies had the ability, bank holding companies, other institutions, to control leverage and didn't. And as you know, these institutions levered up tremendously, such that, for example, at the investment banks, which of course was the SEC's purview, a 2 or 3% drop in values could wipe out all equity.
But isn't it, and I understand there's multiple reasons that lead to this crisis, but would it be fair to say that an absolute major part of this crisis was over-leverage?
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
So doesn't that beg the question then that it really is not a complete lack of regulation, but a lack of enforcement and proper oversight? And that's why I'm a little perplexed by the overreaching of Dodd-Frank, because a lot of this could have been avoided simply by enforcing rules we've had on the books for years.
But here's what we said in our conclusions. We said there was a lot of power and it wasn't used. However, we also note that there were significant gaps that were opened up, and there was regulatory shopping taken countrywide. You can read here how they decide they don't want to be regulated by the Fed. They don't want to be regulated by the OCC. They want to go to the OTS because they're the weakest. Dodd-Frank closes
Time is up, so I just want to make a point. And I concede. However, doesn't prudence and common sense, let's forget we're in the government now, and let's actually try to apply common sense, doesn't it make sense to first fix the problem where rules and regulations exist, so that we enforce that before we go ahead and go to the next step, which I would think would be logically, then add any additional rules or regulations that are needed at that point. But to have a set of rules that we didn't listen to, because for whatever reasons, and then add more on top of that, I would think they're not going to listen to the new rules either.
Quick, I think you need both, and I will just say it, more than most of my career has been in the private sector, and so I come at this with a belief in free markets, but the financial sector is so central. It's like the heart of our system. We don't want arrhythmia. We want to make sure there's, you don't want to kill innovation, but I think there are two problems. We said very clearly here, by the way, that we don't accept the view that regulators didn't have power, but we also say there were big gaps opened. I think it was a dual problem.
Mr. Thomas, just very briefly.
I think there's a real opportunity because clearly Dodd-Frank was passed in a very partisan environment. And we have an opportunity, you folks do in the House, to review the proposed regulations in another partisan environment and make sure that some of the clear overreaching is tempered. So I really think this committee is absolutely fundamental to getting it right. Because, yes, there were regulations that should have been carried out. Have we gone overboard in dealing with them? You're seeing testimony now about certain types of derivatives. Some derivatives need to be transparent and regulated. Some are going to be killed a useful financial tool. You folks, now in the majority, have the chance to go back and revisit those proposed regulations, bring them in here, make them explain why they need all the bells and whistles, because frankly, my bigger concern is going to be a choking up the financial structure in various ways, going to force creativity, because creativity will move to areas that you haven't anticipated. It's best to keep them comfortable, but under a structure.
Mr. Thomas.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now, the